They see two people in the most intimate position that two people are allowed to be portrayed in Egypt.
This episode and others like it are brought to you by the generous support of my patrons over on Patreon. If you'd like early access to every video, ad-free content, and access to our Discord server, consider joining our community. Hello, welcome to Closeted History, the podcast where we out the queer and trans history that you never knew. I am so excited because I am joined by a very special guest, TK from For the Love of History. TK is going to join me today for a little story of some ancient queer love. So TK, do you want to introduce yourself and kind of tell us about your podcast, and then we'll get on with the ancient lovers.
Yes. So my name is TK. I am the host and creator, one woman show behind all things For the Love of History. We talk about world history, women's history, and weird history. So 1 week
I hear it like in your and weird here's history.
I can't say weird history anymore without being like weird history.
Perfect. And that's definitely a testament to the weird stuff you talk about.
It's so true. 1 week we can be talking about how basically all of Europe was in a fever dream together doing rat trials and pig trials and stuff. And then the next week we can talk about like the non-binary spy from Japan who is actually Chinese, like super different topics, which, you know, serves me well sometimes, and other times it's too niche and nobody searches it in the Google and nobody listens.
Well, we definitely love your podcast over here at Closeted History. So definitely check out TK's podcast if you haven't already. And so without a further ado, let's get into the queer ancient lovers.
Okay, I'm so excited about this. So first, I want you to imagine, okay, we're in the year 1964. We're right outside of Cairo in the Saqqara necropolis area, and a brand new burial shaft has been dug up. It's been found, and the two archaeologists who have discovered the shaft are crawling on their hands and knees with their little gas light, and they come upon the offerings chamber where all of the like gifts and stuff go, in tombs and whatever. And in front of them, they see two people in the most intimate position that two people are allowed to be portrayed in Egypt. There's a lot of like rules for portraying people in 5th, 6th, and 7th dynasty Egypt. And this is the most intimate position. One has their arm around the other is grabbing the other person's arm, and their noses are almost touching and their belt loops are touching. So if I were to describe this to you in a heteronormative world, people would think, oh, it's like a married couple. Like it's an intimate, it's a relationship. This is a sexual thing, because once again, this is the most intimate position two people can be depicted in 5th dynasty Egypt. What if I were to tell you that
What if I told you
that these two people were men? This completely blew the roof off of archaeology. So imagine it's the 60s, all right? So we're in 1960s. We're in Egypt. Anything outside of the gender binary, outside of the, one man, one woman is not accepted. So immediately the people who found this once in a lifetime, breathtaking imagery are like, oh, they're brothers. They're just friends. These two people are just BFFs. No big deal. So it was automatically assumed that they were brothers, even though, and we're going to talk about this later, another tomb had been found recently with two people in the same position, and it was automatically assumed that they were married, because that's the kind of world we were living in the 1960s, and sometimes today too.
Right.
So These two people, their name, and hold on, their names are Niankhkhnum, and Khnumhotep. Okay. So it was just decided that they were brothers. And research was done into the tomb and things like that, but it was always from the perspective of these two people were brothers. And it went on this way until a woman named Nadine Cherpion, a French archaeologist, and another man, an independent scholar named Greg Reeder, were like, could we get a look at this? Could you let us take a look at this? Because we think that you're wrong. We think that there's something else going on here. So Nadine, the French archaeologist, her whole career was based on looking at sexual representations in art in Egypt during the 5th, 6th, and 7th dynasty. Because what's unique about the 5th to 7th dynasty is that there was a little bit more artistic allowance. So before that and after that, things were very, very strict. People were only allowed to be depicted in certain ways. The Egyptian art style is very idealistic and doesn't really accurately represent reality. So there was a very unique period in time where, things could get a little bit more scandalous in the way sexual relationships are portrayed. So that's like Natalie's whole thing. Nadine, that's what she studies. But time after time, these two people have been, explained away as just best friends. Okay. And
course.
the biggest, exactly. And no matter what Nadine has said and what Greg Reeder has said, people, they chalk it up to the gay agenda. They're like, of course you're going to put your bias on these two people who are clearly just best friends. And it's explained away in so many ways. So number one is that there is another stela that shows two men in a similar but not the same position. They're not holding each other, they're not touching each other, they are simply facing each other. That's it. In the stela, it says, I can't speak Egyptian, but in the English translation, it says brothers who came to Earth on the same day. So they're like, oh, they're twins. And it uses this hieroglyph SN, which refers to brothers, but it's also used to refer to intimate partners. It's also used to refer to like really close friends, actual documented close friends. And so the people who are on they're just best friends side or their brother's side use that stela as a way to be like, gotcha, they're brothers, maybe best friends, but they're not in a relationship. However, as Nadine and Greg have pointed out, that SN, those two hieroglyphs, appear nowhere at all in this tomb. So even though the positions of these stela are similar and not the same, the hieroglyphs don't appear at all. So there's that out the window. Okay. And then another reason why people think that they are twins, possibly even like actual twins, is because they are represented equally within the tomb. So they have the same offerings in the tomb. There's mirror images of them in the tomb. They appear as the same size in the tomb, except in that one big motif. Khnumhotep is slightly smaller than Niankhkhnum in the tomb, which is very common for women to be portrayed as slightly smaller or a lot smaller in Egyptian hieroglyphs and imagery, which is not to say like women's position was lower. It's just that was the artistic style. Like women were just smaller. They were painted that way. So a lot of the images in the tomb have Khnumhotep taking stereotypically women's roles, being portrayed in women's positions. So that kind of takes the whole brothers argument and I'm sorry, the twins argument out the window. But still, it persists because there are mirror images of them everywhere. So they're like, obviously, clearly they're twins, but I mean, you saw the picture.
They're lovers.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about why Nadine and Greg Reeder are thinking that they are gay, along with many other archaeologists and historians. So I was talking about how Khnumhotep was portrayed in specifically like women's only positions. So there is one scene where the two of them are at dinner and Khnumhotep is holding a lotus. And there are only 3 instances in all of 5th dynasty art where a man is holding a lotus, because that's usually left for women. Women hold the lotus. And he is one of the 3. So it's incredibly rare. And at this scene, they're having dinner, right? The two of them. And Khnumhotep is like smelling his little lotus. And then Niankhkhnum is sitting at the other end of the table, and underneath of them there is a little scene of music going on. And the music that is being played is the song of the two brothers. It started out as an oral tradition. So it's the song of Horus and Set, where Horus is the one who he like dominates Set a little bit. So within this story, he basically says, "How lovely is your backside?" and like is seducing him. Horus is like, I like you, you like me, let's
How
do this whole
lovely is
thing.
your backside?
How lovely is that backside, friend? So they, this story of the two brothers is being sung in this banquet scene. And so maybe we're not 100% sure if it is that song, but usually when the song of the two brothers is talked about in any hieroglyphs, it's talking about that particular song.
Okay.
And another thing that is interesting about this dinner scene is that Niankhkhnum, his wife, was in the picture. However, her image was plastered over. Yes. So her whole image was plastered over. Surprise, surprise. Both of them had wives and children. But we'll talk about that in a second.
Okay.
So his wife was completely plastered over. And not in like the way that's like aggressive and like let's erase her from history completely kind of a way. It was the erase button for hieroglyphs, so they just plastered over her, and the only thing that you can see now is her fingers slightly holding onto his arm and like the very top of his head. So for whatever reason, her image was erased. Okay, so like I said, spoiler alert, these two did have families. They had wives and children who are displayed in the tomb. I think it was Niankhkhnum who had like 4 sons and like 3 daughters, and then Khnumhotep also had like 4 kids. However, they are never portrayed in intimate positions with their wives in the tomb. The only intimate like depictions are of the two of them together. never with their wives. They're not even really close to their wives in any of the pictures, which would stand to reason because it wasn't unusual for people to want to carry on their lineage and have kids to continue the name, but have, you know, a little thing on the side. And not just a little thing on the side, because the two of them are depicted at the very front. The tomb's name is their names combined. And sometimes, particularly this one guy, Dr. John Baines. I don't know what Dr. John Baines, like what is up his butt, but he is very upset about people even thinking that homosexuality was a thing in ancient Egypt. He is like the number one guy who is like, absolutely not. They are not gay. You are imposing your modern, you know, ideals and biases on these people who are just clearly in a very intimate homosocial relationship. So I don't know what's wrong with John.
Okay.
John is not on board. And and yes, he even goes so far as to say like that their names are even, you know, indications that they are just brothers, that they are just twins. And he's not the only one. There's also other historians that are like for example, Dr. O'Connor. There is this guy named Dr. O'Connor, and he has the idea that they are conjoined twins. He goes a step further and he's like, they're not just twins, they're conjoined twins because of their name. Khnum is in both of their names, right? And Khnum is the god of like children, like creating children in the womb. It's not his only job, but that's like his main job. And so both of them hypothesize that these two are twins, maybe even conjoined twins, because their names have to do with the creator god who creates children in the womb, and also Niankhkhnum. The Niam part of his name means unity. So they both are like, they're twins. They're definitely twins. But again, unity could mean all sorts of things.
Yeah, especially absolutely in that context.
So we've got the song, we've got the images of them together, and we also have very gender ambiguous terminology used to describe both of the men within the tomb. Okay. So gender ambiguous terminology was used from time to time in different places. Like we have the Pharaoh Hatshepsut, who, you know, portrayed herself as a man for power and, you know, to establish her dynasty. But we also have it in this situation too, specifically when it comes to Khnumhotep, who is portrayed in more feminine presenting styles, holding the lotus, always being behind the other, you know, sitting at one end of the table, being slightly smaller in a lot of the images. So does that mean that they were, you know, transgender? We have no idea. Does that mean they were, you know, non-binary? We have no idea, because we don't really know what those gender neutral terms meant for the ancient Egyptians. We just know that they weren't using friend words. Do you know what I mean?
And they were lovers.
They were lovers, right? They weren't using the terminology for brothers. They weren't using the terminology for friends. That's not what was being used in this tomb. And also the tomb itself is a huge indicator that these two were together, because this kind of tomb was used only for very important people. So these two, Khnumhotep and Niankhkhnum, they were very important in Egyptian society. They were the manicurists to the pharaoh. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And this is exactly what it sounds like. They did the pharaoh's nails, and they also kept the pharaoh up on his hygiene. They did the pharaoh's hair. They would do like esthetician-y type things. If the pharaoh felt ill, they would do like therapeutic massages, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Their whole job was to keep the pharaoh in good health and looking good, because hygiene was incredibly important to the Egyptian people.
Mm-hmm.
Super, super important. So their jobs were together, and they worked together, and their position allowed them to be able to have this tomb. Like this kind of tomb would not have been sanctioned unless they had a high position.
Okay.
And their tombs are built in a way, like in the family way. So this is a tomb for like a husband and wife and their family, and they're in high positions. And having the two of them as the main picture when you first go in, it's like having your wedding picture in your hallway, like in your entrance. Like, this
It's
is
like you're
our
about to
house.
enter the home of this couple. Here picture of our kids.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is like. So yeah, we've got the tomb itself, we've got the pictures, we've got the gender ambiguous terminology, we've got the other, pictures of them, we've got the equal representation of the two of them in the tomb, and we also have the possibility that Niankhkhnum died before Khnumhotep. So that is kind of another thing that disproves the conjoined twin theory. Okay. Yes. So if these two were conjoined twins, maybe they could have been surgically separated. And surgery did happen in ancient Egypt, but like surgically removing conjoined twins, like is asking a bit much of the ancient people, right? So if they were conjoined twins, it's like it's a very large logical leap. So in some of the pictures inside the tomb, Niankhkhnum was talked about in names that are given to a person after they die, and then Khnumhotep was referred to as his like alive name in the same images. Yes. So there's one hypothesis that Khnumhotep was like, get his wife out of here, in that one banquet picture in Niankhkhnum when his wife was behind him. So they're like, maybe Khnumhotep was like, let's erase her because we were the ones who were actually in love. But again, this is just hypothesis.
Okay.
So we don't know. We have absolutely no idea for sure.
Yeah, it can be really difficult, especially when looking into like ancient history, that like you kind of have to be satisfied with like, yeah, maybe, but we never know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Exactly.
Well,
Exactly.
I mean, this all has been definitely things to think about, but I feel pretty convinced that they were lovers.
Yeah. Well, I think this is an excellent case study for bias. So we've got these archaeologists who are like, how dare you put your bias on this situation, on this archaeological, find, when at the same time we could turn it around and say, how dare you put your bias on this situation? Because if we were the ancient Greeks, the classical Greeks, looking at this tomb, homosexuality and it was totally normal and accepted back then in the classic Greek time. So they would look at these two men and be like, yeah, no, this makes sense. So at the same time, when they say, don't put your bias on things, you don't put your bias on things.
Right.
Let's look at the evidence. Let's look at the evidence here. We have all of these images of married couples that we automatically accept as being married couples. And then you
Mm-hmm.
have this image of these two men, and that's when it becomes an issue. And I
Right.
think that's where people have to be really careful. If you have to make all of these exceptionalist like leaps, then what are we really doing here?
Right.
Conjoined twins, brothers. It just seems like you're doing a little bit much, which I'm
Right. Just
very
let them be gay. Just let
just
them
let
be
them be
gay.
gay, please.
Yeah.
And I think that, that's why representation is so important
Mm-hmm.
in people who tell history. So, like, you and I have very different perspectives on this situation than the other archaeologists who are and historians who are reporting on this situation. Thank goodness that Nadine was here to, give her expertise on this. She had another perspective. So, having not only different perspectives researching history, but also telling history, I think
Mm-hmm.
is very, very important because, of course, we're going to focus on things that are important to us. Of course. Of course.
Right.
That's just what's going to happen.
We all
And
have
so,
a For You page. You see what you
exactly.
see.
Exactly. So, having, I think now, this age of independence in I don't know, in telling information, I don't have a more eloquent way to put that, is really important because there are so many paywalls around things. And we were talking
Yep.
about this at the very beginning, and you were like, no, 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 stop. We gotta record this. There are
Yep.
so many paywalls. When I was researching for this, like, there was a New York Times article that I really wanted to read. Paywall. There is a JSTOR article that I wanted to read, and JSTOR allows you to, read some free articles. This was not one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Why was this not one of them? And then,
Classism, capitalism.
classism. Exactly. Yeah, and
I
I
could
also
go
want to
on.
know exactly. Who decides what are the free articles on JSTOR and what are not the free articles on JSTOR? So,
I'm sure
within
it's
this,
intentional. Yeah.
right? Like, I don't
Yeah.
want to be that girl, but I'm going to be that girl. I'm going to be like a little bit Debbie Downer on this situation. Like, come on. Come on.
Well,
You know what you're doing.
that's why it's super important to support creators when you can. So if you have the means, both TK and I both have Patreon pages.
We sure
Shameless
do.
plug.
Shameless plug.
But yeah,
Shameless plug.
TK, why don't you tell the good folks where they can find you?
Yes, thank you so much. So I have my podcast, For the Love of History. You can find me on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform. You can also find me on Instagram at For the Love of _History Podcast. I'm on TikTok too, but it's like the same thing as Instagram. So just do Instagram unless you really love TikTok, then that's fine too.
We got to stay away from TikTok. The comments are they are really really mean. But yeah,
Yes, it's
and
crazy.
if you're listening, go and give TK some extra love on YouTube. She's just getting started
Thank
over there,
you.
so all the likes,
Yeah.
comments, any interaction helps out a fellow creator. So thanks so much for coming on. I had so much fun.
You're so
So yeah,
welcome.
this has been Closeted History. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you the next time.